Well, our topic for today is tourism, and it sort of builds off of our last couple of topics. We talked about modernization, and we talked about stereotypes, and tourism has connections with both of those. And we will talk a little bit about the history of tourism in the region. We'll talk about the importance of tourism to the Ozark economy, where tourism is important, where it's basically non-existent. It's kind of like when we talked about the poultry industry. It's either real heavy in places and real important, or it's just almost not there in other places. Tourism's similar to that, and we'll get to all that. But before we do, we've got our famous Ozarker of the day. Someone in green hiding amongst the reeds, or whatever that is there. Anybody? I will tell you that, because it's probably not going to help you anyway. She is a poet. And since most people, when you ask them to name a poet, can name Robert Frost and maybe no one else, I'm guessing our secret may still be safe. She's a poet, and she's from the Ozarks, obviously, or she wouldn't be up there. Anybody read poetry? Anybody can rhyme words? They don't do that anymore in poetry, but used to they did. It was kind of fun, you know. That's like kids' poetry nowadays when it rhymes. Okay. Well, this person is C.D. Wright, and I'm not sure how comfortable she would be with us putting her birth date up there, but it's up there. C.D. Wright is from Mountain Home, Arkansas, and is the Poet Laureate of Rhode Island. Now, how unlikely is that? You know, that's quite an unusual accomplishment for a native of the Ozarks.
What is a Poet Laureate?
It's basically the official poet.
The poet.
Right. I'm sure Missouri has a Poet Laureate. I don't know who it is. A lot of her poetry is sort of earthy and kind of rural in nature, and harkens back to her childhood or her memories of Arkansas. She's got a Southern or an Ozark voice that's been changed a little bit by, you know, living most of her life outside the region, but you can still detect something in there. But that's C.D. Wright, professor at an Ivy League school. Something to aspire to. All right. And our word for the day, I don't know if C.D. Wright would know this word. Poets seem to know lots about lots of words, so I wouldn't be surprised if she knew what a hog molly was or is.
It's a little sucker fish.
You got it. How'd you know that?
I've gigged them before.
Okay, so you've got experience with the hog molly, do you? All right. That's what a hog molly is, and I've got a picture. We'll see the picture in a minute after we see the definition. Its official name is the northern hog sucker. Hog molly sounds more poetic for certain than hog sucker does. There are lots of different kinds of suckers. The red horse may be the best known kind, but this is one of them. And there it is.
Is that like Nixa sucker days? Is that what they're eating?
Exactly, yeah. Or it could be that, or it could be a different kind of sucker. But Nixa...
They all taste the same.
No, I've had them at Nixa. They're pretty good.
You got to know how to cook them. I think that's the... Yeah, this is... Nixa Sucker Days is 2 weeks from Saturday. It's May 18th. It's always, I guess it's around the middle of May every year. And they've been doing that since, I think 1957 is the first year that Nixa had its Sucker Day or Sucker Days, and it sort of celebrates the running of the suckers. There's a certain time of year when the suckers run upstream, and people get out and gig them or try to catch them with nets and stuff like that. And this time of year is when you can see lots of suckers in the creeks and the streams of the Ozarks, and then they seem to disappear for most of the rest of the year. You know?
That's the thing, they snag them. Like they throw out these big treble hooks
Yeah.
that lay on the bottom of the ground, and then they just pull it up, and then they hopefully hook them, and then they pull
Right.
them in.
Yeah. That's it. There's so many of them
Yeah.
that run up that chances are you'll catch one sooner or later doing that. Yeah. And I've even caught them just fishing before when I was a kid. Just like fishing for brim or bluegill or something in a creek. And a certain time of year, you can catch them on nearly anything. So that introduces us to tourism. The Sucker Days is a form of local tourism. And I'm sure that when it was founded back in the 1950s, that a big part of the reason it was founded was to try to generate money for businesses in Nixa and to get people to come to Nixa on a day that they ordinarily wouldn't, or get people who ordinarily would never come to Nixa to come to Nixa and spend a little money. And nowadays, however many years later, 56 years later, there are festivals and similar things in every community, practically every weekend. You can find something from the time of the last frost until the first frost in the fall. There's something going on somewhere, and especially in a place like the Ozarks, you've got your pick pretty much every weekend. And a lot of it has to do with attempts by towns and counties to tap into this growing tourist market that has been booming, especially since World War II, but as we'll see, is no new phenomenon in the Ozarks. Tourism has long been a very important industry in the Ozarks, and in some places is the industry. Today it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, I don't think there's any exact science on the way that government officials calculate tourism spending. You can go today and find like the 2011, maybe even the 2012 annual report for the state of Missouri, the state of Arkansas, the state of practically any state on tourism expenditures. But what these count are things that are not always related to tourism. Tourism expenditures will keep up with like restaurant and hotel expenses. Maybe even in some places like gas station expenses, stuff like that. There's a whole list. You can go to the Missouri Parks Department or whatever the official name of that agency is in the state of Missouri, and it gives you a list of more than a dozen things that they tabulate to come up with expenditures related to tourism. And Arkansas, I think, even has a longer list, but we'll get into that in a minute. It differs a little from state to state how they calculate tourism expenses. So when we look at our map and we kind of compare one county to another, it's not easy to compare them across the state line because Arkansas and Missouri calculate their numbers a little differently. But we can still get an idea of how important tourism is to a county's economy, to a town's economy by looking at some of these numbers. But we do know that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that it's an industry that, as we said earlier, doesn't affect every place in the same way. If you just look at gross tourism dollars, it's no surprise that the way they're calculated, the places that have the most tourism spending tend to be metropolitan areas. St. Louis is far and away the leading tourist destination in Missouri. It is, in fact, and it is because it's St. Louis and it's got a very large population with lots of restaurants and hotels and stuff. And of course, a lot of that spending has nothing to do with tourism, but a lot of it does too. And I guess there's no easy way to parse out, which hotel expenses are tourism related and which are business related and all that kind of stuff. But as you can imagine, St. Louis attracts tourists from all over Missouri and all over the country. But the Ozarks kind of comes in pretty soon behind that. In the Ozarks, Greene County, Springfield, has the most spending, tourism-related spending just in general, not looking at it per capita, just gross numbers, has the most spending. And not surprisingly, the counties with the largest populations in Arkansas, Benton County, Washington County also generate the most tourism expenditures. Again, how many of those are actually related to what we would call tourism, it's hard to tell. But you also have, outside of these large metropolitan areas in the Ozarks, you have more rural or small town areas like the Branson area, Taney County, Stone County, that are heavily dependent on tourism and where millions and millions of dollars are spent each year that are directly related to tourism. Here's a little map that I put together that will give you an idea. The darker the coloring on the counties, the more tourism spending per capita. So what I did, I took the gross tourism expenditure numbers, figured them up based on the population of each county, and there's no real big surprise there. The county that you could say is the most dependent on tourism is this county, and that county is what? Taney County. Branson, no surprise that there's more tourism spending per capita in Taney County than there is anywhere else in the Ozarks. And second place is this county here, just down across the state lines. Anybody know what county that is? That's Eureka Springs. It's Carroll County. So the numbers start to make sense when you look at the map and you think of what is where these darkened places are. Now again, as I mentioned, the state of Arkansas and the state of Missouri tabulate their numbers differently, and I couldn't tell if maybe Arkansas cast a wider net and calculated more numbers, because in general the Arkansas counties seem to generate more tourism dollars than the Missouri counties. That may just be a fact, or it may be a result of the mathematics going on behind the scenes. So you've got, after Taney County and Carroll County, the other dark counties, you can see here. Does anybody know where that is? Lake of the Ozarks, Camden County. So no surprise there that that's a heavy tourist area. And I can't tell if that's next dark or, I think that's like the third level. These dark ones down here, this is Stone County, Arkansas. That's where the Ghost of the Ozarks took place. That has nothing to do with their local tourism economy. But this is, you remember we talked about earlier, I think we talked about the Ozark Folk Center. Did we talk about the Folk Center in here? That's where the Ozark Folk Center is. Stone County also is home to Blanchard Springs Caverns. The National Park Service, or actually it's the National Forest Service, runs a big cave operation there. And there's a lot of national forest land. So that's a real heavy touristy area, and there's not many people there. So if you figure up tourist spending per capita, that's probably a better indication of how important tourism is to the economy. This is Baxter County, Arkansas, where Mountain Home is, where C.D. Wright is from. And Mountain Home is situated in between Bull Shoals Lake and Norfolk Lake. And just as the Lake of the Ozarks generates lots and lots of tourism money up here, the lakes do down here as well. Stone County, you get Shepherd of the Hills is actually in Stone County. It's not in Taney County. and not Shepherd of the Hills. What am I thinking of? Silver Dollar City. Silver Dollar City is on the Stone County side. It's not in Taney County. And also you've got Table Rock Lake down there, so you get lots of tourism in that area. And down here, this is Cleburne County, Arkansas, and there's a lake right in the middle of that county as well. So you can see that where the Army Corps of Engineers built lakes, and we'll talk about some of the specific lakes later, built dams and man-made reservoirs. These tend to be high-traffic tourist areas with lots of tourism money generated by boating and hotels and all that kind of stuff. So you can see lots of these white counties where tourism really plays either a very small part of the economy or tourism is just non-existent in some of these places. And much of the Ozarks, looks like about roughly half of the counties fall into that category where tourism is just not all that important. Maybe the scenery's not good. Maybe they're just too far away from an interstate or too far away from a lake or something like that. Any number of reasons why places have not been able to tap into this burgeoning tourism market in the Ozarks, especially since World War II. Though most communities, most counties have tried to at some time or another, they may just not have been very successful in doing that. Now, some of these places are, if you spent much time as a tourist in the Ozarks, you may recognize some of these white counties as touristy, even though they're not showing up as touristy counties. Has anyone ever floated Current River or the Jacks Fork? Over in here, here's Shannon County, right here. And it shows up as kind of a non-tourist destination, but that's one of the few industries over there. They've got the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, and floating those rivers, the Jacks Fork or the Current, one of the few things to do over there, but that doesn't seem to generate a whole lot of revenue for those places, a lot of tourism expenditures, even though I would consider that area kind of a touristy area. It's just not a touristy area that generates a lot of tourist dollars like Branson does, or like Eureka Springs, or like a lot of the lake areas. And so you can find some examples like that too. But a lot of these places, you look at like Wright County, Texas County, you think of those places, and there's just not a lot of tourism going on in those places. Not a lot for a tourist to do. They're drive-through places.
Hartville did have like a reenactment of a Civil War battle there
Yeah.
last Saturday. If you heard about
Hartville did?
Yeah.
They did their civil?
it. It was a big deal.
Yeah. Well, it would have been. I mean, Hartville is got a population of about 500 people, so there were, who knows how many times the town doubled and tripled and quadrupled just by getting some people to come and visit. Yeah. Did you go?
No.
Yeah.
No, I just saw pictures.
Yeah. Hartville. Yeah. But there was a small Civil War skirmish at Hartville. It wasn't in April. I think it was in January, if I remember right. But if you're going to do a reenactment, you'd rather do it in the spring than in January, right? You don't want to freeze to death out there. Just because the original guys had to doesn't mean that we have to. But that gives you a little bit of an idea of tourism spending in the Ozarks. And here, of course, is Greene County. And Greene County, there are millions and millions of tourism-related dollars spent in Greene County every year, but the county is big and thriving in a lot of other ways, and so tourism isn't quite as important to the local economy here as it is to, say, Taney County and Stone County, though, obviously Bass Pro Shops brings in busloads of tourists on a daily basis from all over the place, from all over the world, and there are other things that bring people who would be considered tourists into Springfield as well.
I don't know if we've said this class
Uh-huh.
tourism major,
Uh-huh.
and Bass Pro is actually the #1 attraction in Missouri that brings
That's what I've heard,
visitors.
The number one single attraction.
Single attraction,
Yeah.
yes, Bass Pro Shop.
Yeah.
Money-wise?
I'm not sure
People-wise.
which way. I think people-wise.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
I know it's considered the top
Right.
attraction.
Yeah, Bass Pro Shop, the number one single attraction in Missouri. That's, yeah,
I know, 'cause
Makes
in
sense.
class everyone thinks the arch, stuff like that, but.
right,
What does that say?
yeah,
I know, right?
right. Well, you can fit a lot more people into Bass Pro Shops than you can into the arch. Those, those little elevators that go to the top of the arch don't hold many people. You don't want many people in there with you when you go to the top of the arch because they're a little creaky. But now, as far as areas, not just venues or whatever the terminology they use, towns or areas or anything like that, Branson is actually the second most visited place in Missouri, or it was as of 2011, behind St. Louis. And that's pretty impressive when you think about where Branson has come from, in the last, as we'll see, Branson has been a tourist town for as long as anybody can remember and longer, but it's exploded so much within the last 25 years as a tourist town to be second to St. Louis in terms of people visiting there. That's quite a feat. The Lake of the Ozarks is the 5th most visited area in Missouri. And the Lake of the Ozarks, probably, if you had done this back in, say, the 50s or 60s, it was probably the number 1 most visited place in Missouri. The Lake of the Ozarks being situated between Kansas City and St. Louis and pretty easy access from both of the major metropolitan areas of Missouri, just exploded in the post-World War II years. And not just for, especially for Missouri people, but lots of people from Iowa and Kansas and other places, Illinois, came to the Lake of the Ozarks.
Isn't Lake of the Ozarks considered like the second most dangerous water way in the country? There's the second most deaths on that lake.
Second most deaths.
River,
Yeah, I don't know. It's turned into the day of lists in here, and unfortunately, I don't know the answer to.
It's like the Colorado River's #1.
Yeah, Lake of the Ozarks. Yeah, my guess is that the Lake of the Ozarks, there may not be anything inherently dangerous about it, but it's the Lake of the Ozarks seems to be so associated with drinking and partying and stuff like that.
It's not the cleanest lake around either.
No, it's and we'll
They keep closing it because the kids are getting, all kinds of
sure
bugs.
you come away from there with stuff that you don't.
What you drink and,
Sure.
yeah, sure.
And we'll actually, a little bit later on, we'll talk about what makes the Lake of the Ozarks different from most of the other, from the Army Corps of Engineers lakes in the Ozarks. How those are different, how the background to them is different. But it may very well be, but I do know it has a reputation as, the party lake and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there are fewer regulations on what you can and can't do on the Lake of the Ozarks than you get on most of the other lakes in the region. And also in the top 10 of Missouri's most visited destinations, you've got Springfield, which is probably largely because of Bass Pro Shops. And Silver Dollar City is now this, I'm not sure, the list that I was looking at, Silver Dollar City was the only individual venue that was listed. And I think the reason they did that was maybe because it's in a different county from Branson. It's in Stone County. And so they actually listed Silver Dollar City separate from everything else. There was no explanation why that was. And then also the Joplin Carthage area was in the top 10. But
Is that because of Route 66
I really don't know why. Nothing against Joplin, but I don't know. I really don't know what draws people over there.
What's the name of that place? Is it Precious Moment?
Well, that's the only thing that's the billboards you see when you're driving down I-44. They have those, is that what they're called, precious moments? The little
Yeah.
Christian-themed
Yeah.
something?
Casino's right on the other side of the road.
The casino, that could, so you get your sinners and saints heading over that direction, don't you? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what, I know what you're talking about. I've seen those billboards. I don't really know exactly, but I guess that draws a lot of people over there.
Oh, yeah.
Does it really? I don't.
I remember when I was little, like,
Yeah. I've never been tempted to pull off the interstate because of it, but I'm sure the billboards are up there for a reason.
Big business.
Yeah.
Where's Kansas City, Pete?
It's in the top 10. I just didn't put it up there. I'm just we're ignoring everything that's not in the Ozarks.
Oh.
Kansas City's probably number 3 after Branson. I don't remember the exact order of these places, but I figure it was probably number 3.
Carthage has a lot of history.
Yeah, it's a lot of history.
A lot of old
I'm not sure how much history draws people. We know that some of the draw to St. Louis, probably a very small percentage of the tourist draw, is history related with Lewis and Clark. And I guess you could call the arch history related, though it's not really. But you think of all the things, the St. Louis Cardinals is just a massive draw, a tourism draw for them. People just come from everywhere. When I was a kid, we used to drive from Arkansas to we would drive to Kansas City as well. My dad was a huge baseball fan, so we would, that was usually our vacation. Who are we going to watch this year? But as we've seen, there were lots of those blank counties on there. And tourism is important for towns, for counties, because of the tax money that it generates. You can just imagine how crucial tourism spending is to Taney County, to Branson. All that tax money coming in, you look at you get your hotel bill and you look at the hotel tax on there, and that's going to, a lot of that goes to the local economy. And the map, there are 21 counties in the Ozarks, Arkansas and Missouri, in which tourism was small enough that there were fewer than $10 million in tourism-related expenditures. And most of these are very rural counties where, some counties where you may only have 2 or 3 hotels in the entire county, where you may not have much more than a dozen eating places. There's just not a lot going on, a lot generated. If I can find, let's see here. Let me share some of these statistics I've got with you. Going back to our map, the per capita numbers, these are, I don't think I gave these numbers to you earlier. And these are the result of my own number crunching, so these are not official. And I take no responsibility for how bad my calculator was, but I'm going to give them the numbers to you anyway. This is from 2011, Taney County. For every resident of Taney County, for every permanent resident in Taney County, and I don't remember what the population is, around 50,000 or something like that, there were in 2011 more than $8,400 in tourism-related expenditures in Taney County. So that's quite a bit, over $8,400 per resident. That's not per visitor, but per resident. So that's what makes Taney County the most tourism concentrated place in all of the Ozarks. And of course, most of that was Branson. Carroll County, Arkansas, where Eureka Springs is, there were more than $6,200 in tourism-related expenditures per person in Carroll County. Carroll County has a much smaller population, so the gross figures wouldn't be nearly as high as in Taney County, but they're closer when you start looking at it on a per capita basis. And a couple of those other Arkansas counties were over $5,000 per resident. And Stone County, Missouri, which is right next, that's where Silver Dollar City is, right next to Taney County, over $4,300 per resident. Stone County's population is going to be much smaller, and probably a huge chunk of its tourism expenses come from Silver Dollar City, I would guess. In Camden County, Missouri, Lake of the Ozarks, over $3,200 per resident there in tourism spending. So again, that just gives you a little bit of an idea of how important tourism is to the economy. And I think I do have somewhere on here. Now this is from fiscal year 2011, and this is where I got those statistics, or those the numbers earlier, where Branson was the second most popular destination and that kind of stuff. Fiscal year 2011, approximately 25% of all people who all tourists who visited Missouri, or all travelers who visited Missouri, visited Branson that year. Approximately 31% visited St. Louis. So it's not far behind St. Louis in that regard. Kansas City was third at 22% of all visitors visiting these places. So again, if you just look at the raw numbers, St. Louis and Kansas City generate millions and millions of more dollars, but they've got tens of thousands of more people living in those places as well. There were a handful of counties where the tourism industry was basically non-existent in the Ozarks. I noticed Dade County, Missouri, everybody knows where Dade County is, it's northwest of here, had, if you remember, the figure for Branson, or for Taney County, was over $8,400 per capita tourism expenditures. In Dade County, it's $266 per capita. So there is no tourism industry in Dade County. It's official. And there are lots of examples like that, lots of them that are under 500. Bollinger County over in the southeast Ozarks, $315. Nobody visiting Bollinger County, you know, it's a drive-through place. St. Clair County, which is, I think that's where Osceola is, it's $357. So you got lots of these places. Shannon County, which surprised me, $486.
What about Douglas? 'Cause we have Foxtrotters twice a year, so that's
Douglas County is just barely better, $489. So you need more Foxtrotters meetings in Douglas County.
June and September.
Yeah. So yeah, and Greene County is just over $2,000 per capita.
Do you have Webster?
Yeah, Webster's $608. Yeah. So they're rolling in the money compared to Dade County or St. Clair County, somewhere like that. So, but you know, it just tells us that a lot of these places are not tourism destinations, even though the numbers themselves are, you know, it's a little hard to kind of wrap your head around exactly what they're computing, but they seem to be pretty close if you get it into per capita numbers. All right. Well, let's talk just a little bit about tourism history in the Ozarks. And we begin, not surprisingly, with the part of the region that's closest to St. Louis, because the real money in Missouri for so many years was in St. Louis. In the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, St. Louis was one of the major metropolitan centers of the United States in general. It was a top 5 city in the country. The 20th century wasn't kind to St. Louis, and that it kind of fell behind a lot of other American cities. I don't think it's in the top 20 now in terms of population, but back in those days, lots of wealth, lots of affluence in St. Louis. And in the late 1800s, after the Civil War, you had St. Louisans who traveled down the railroad. Remember, we got the railroad built down to Pilot Knob on the eve of the Civil War, and the railroad was still there and eventually expanded after the Civil War. And they would drive down to the Arcadia, Ironton area, and that area, especially around Arcadia, developed into kind of a summer home cottage place for wealthy St. Louis people. There was an attempt in the late 1800s to kind of turn it into sort of a Missouri, Saratoga, New York, a place where the wealthy would send their families in the summertime, and the men would go down on Friday evenings after work and spend the weekend and go back to work on Monday morning and that kind of stuff. And they were able to do that because of rail service and because of its proximity to St. Louis. It was a quick trip from there by rail down to these places. And hotels developed in this area, and you had the usual kind of outdoor activities for families. But the first thing that really impacted other places in the region was the healing water craze of the late 1800s. And this was a craze that not only affected the Ozarks, but affected lots of other places around the United States. Anywhere where you had these springs that had different kinds of minerals in them, or maybe kind of salty springs, and anything that was a little unusual that people could tout as healing springs, as healing water. We're talking about the late 1800s, an age when healthcare was certainly not nearly as advanced as it is today, and a lot of people got the idea that just by going and sitting in this spring water, you could heal certain things. You could heal. Many people thought you could heal just nearly anything by drinking it. You know, you could get healthier, and so you saw a lot of these. The first one in the Ozarks was the first one to really boom in a big way in the Ozarks was Eureka Springs, and Eureka Springs is kind of neat in that it's still there, and it's still a major tourist destination. Most of these spring towns, these spa towns of the Ozarks, eventually disappeared. Many of them were built kind of out in the middle of nowhere just because somebody found a spring and started selling house sites, built a resort or a motel or something and brought people in. But Eureka Springs boomed in the late 1800s. You can see that its life really starts about 1879 after a local dignitary claimed to have been cured by one of these springs. And the town develops as a boom town right there, kind of a tent town, and then eventually into a real town with buildings and streets and all that kind of stuff, so that by the time the census taker came through in 1880, there were already about 3,000 people living in Eureka Springs. Some pictures from Eureka Springs. There's the Crescent Hotel, built in the late 1800s. I'm not sure what this building on the right is, but I put it up there because you can see this rock that it's partially built on. A lot of the money that built up Eureka Springs, a lot of it had connections to St. Louis, and a lot of it had connections to the Republican Party. And there were political cliques that were involved there, and your usual money people. Eventually, the railroad was built to Eureka Springs so people could get from St. Louis and Kansas City to Eureka Springs. And that's when it really takes off, when you can get there by rail, and the wealthy start coming there.
What about Hot Springs? Is it developing at the same time?
Hot Springs really starts developing even earlier than Eureka Springs. Yeah, down in the Ouachita Mountains, Hot Springs, it predates Eureka Springs by many years. It only booms after the Civil War, but it had seen limited development before the Civil War. Yeah.
Is that Crescent Hotel the one that you see in all the pictures that's on there?
It's on the side of a hill where you can go out to ground level on like 3 or 4 different floors or something.
Isn't it haunted, right? Or supposed to be?
Right, yeah. I think they do haunted tours and stuff of the Crescent today. Yeah, yeah. I've never stayed in it, but
Well, I just mean
yeah.
the whole town.
Yeah, Eureka is a unique place for the Ozarks.
Funky.
It's a place that I would consider not at all Ozarky. You know, there's nothing really sort of that says Ozarks about Eureka Springs except for the terrain. It's hilly and rocky, but other than that, the town has has an identity of its own apart from the region's history.
Are the springs still there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Bathhouses and stuff?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if not like in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where you still have like Bathhouse Row
They
down
built the
there.
life over or something.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't know. I've never taken the spring, the water or whatever you call it in Eureka Springs.
Or whatever.
Yeah, but it is a weird town. The streets, are just go everywhere because it's a place where no one in their right mind would have built a town in Eureka Springs had it not been for that spring water. I mean, that's the reason there was no town there in 1879, because it's hilly and rocky and so it develops into this weird sort of place. And we'll see later, Eureka Springs goes through many incarnations. In the early 1900s, it becomes kind of an artist, writer colony kind of place. And then it later becomes a place that attracts hippies and counterculture types. And then you get Christ of the Ozarks, and you get your kind of Christian theme park crowd. I mean, it's a unique place. Though I would say, if you've been to many just pure tourist towns in America, a lot of downtown Eureka Springs is going to remind you of pure tourist towns. With the sort of kind of hippie-themed stores and kind of new agey stuff that you see around there. You see that in a lot of especially mountain touristy places. Branson, not so much. It has it's got its own thing going on down there that's very different from Eureka. Yeah, Eureka Springs I guess they have annual rainbow pride parades, and they've got like they have I think there's a blues festival there every year, and they still have their old Ozark Folk Festival there, which has morphed into it's not just hillbilly music anymore. It is if you haven't been to Eureka Springs, visit Eureka Springs and just hang out a while. See what's there. Some more Eureka Springs pictures. The hotel all red. I don't know if that's there or not. I just found some of these pictures, but I like that one because it also had this thing here. Rooms with bath, $1. Rooms without bath, 50 cents or 75 cents. If you visit today, you're going to pay more than that, but and then I like this, European and American plan. And I don't really know exactly what that means. Someone suggested to me once that one of them probably means meals and the other one probably means without meals. Yeah.
You got electric lights.
Yeah, electric lights. Yeah, I don't know what the date is. There's no date on that thing, but first class cafe connecting to lobby. So, pretty good stuff. Steam heated. And here's a map. This is just a few of the healing springs that developed into kind of resort towns in the late 1800s. And these things were everywhere around the Ozarks. You can see there, I mean, they're scattered around all over the place. And you can even see down in Greene County, I think this one may be O to V. I'm not sure which one. There are two dots here, and I don't know which dot goes with which town. One's named Reno and one's O to V. I think O to V was south of Ozarks, so that may be that one. But these places, don't exist anymore. But for a time, for a decade or a few years, they boomed, and there was a hotel and people visiting and that kind of stuff. Just all over the place. And you could probably put 3 times that many on the map and still not have all of them if you counted even the little rinky-dink ones where they were just open for a year or two. You know, it was really just, it was just part of the craze. It was another example of how in the Ozarks, we often are tempted to view these things as kind of unique and look what happened to the Ozarks, but we were just really participating in a national, international craze that was sweeping Europe and the United States and Oklahoma. Yeah, you would just all over the place, wherever you had spring water, and yeah. And in a lot of cases, see, not all of these little spring water towns had access to the railroad, and those usually dried up and died. Maybe not dried up literally, but they didn't survive. And sometimes the ones that did survive, like Eureka Springs, were the ones that had rail access. People could get there a lot easier in the days before automobiles. And some of these are still there, like Heber Springs. Today, that's still a touristy place because there's a lake that's built right next to Heber Springs. So Siloam Springs, that's still there. There's a college there. Yeah, El Dorado Springs. A lot of those, Climax Spring is still there. It's not a booming place, but I think the last time I was there, the roads in downtown Climax Springs were kind of half gravel, half pavement. I don't really know, but it's seen better days. But a lot of these places, we've never heard of, like Blankenship Spring, the Siloam Springs, Lithium Springs. The local people of the area would probably know, well, that was at so-and-so, but most of us have never heard of these places because they don't really exist anymore. The spring is probably still there, like Welch's Spring. It's still there, but there's no resort or anything.
Is that the one on either the current or?
Yeah,
Is that the one?
Welch's Cave.
Yeah, the TV. Big Sam-
Yeah, that's where
People came for the cures.
right. Yeah, that was actually an early 20th century
They came in by wagon.
development.
I think, huh?
Yeah. No, there wasn't railroad service there, or there wasn't always. There may have been during the lumber boom. There may have been like a branch of a railroad there, but yeah, that had a big operation in Shannon County. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll finish our tourism stuff when we come back. We'll talk a little floating and fishing, and we'll talk a little Silver Dollar City.